Sorry? Yes. Okay. Hello, everyone. Dear ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed experts. My name is Ali Al-Awadi, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Dr. Mohammed Al-Ali, the CEO of Trends Research and Advisory. On the eve of the United Nations 45th Annual International Women's Day, which was inaugurated on the 8th of March, 1977, this e-lecture is organized in recognition of all the trials and tribulations faced by women of all ethnicities and in all times, and as a celebration of their remarkable accomplishments and trailblazing achievements. Today, we have a special guest whose professional career poses an inspiration for many, the head of AI governance and policy at the Office of AI, Digital Economy, and Remote Work Applications at the Prime Minister's Office, Sumaya Al-Hajri. Sumaya Al-Hajri has championed an impressive career in AI, data privacy legislations, outer space, and telecommunications policy. With a Bachelor of Science in Electrical and Telecommunications Engineering and a Master's in International Law, Diplomacy, and International Relations, Al-Hajri successfully completed the Space Studies program at the International Space University in 2019, before pursuing a second master's degree in Public Policy, Science, Technology, and Innovation at the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government, where she graduated with distinction in 2020. Our guest today has risen up the ranks of the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority, held the title of Head of Space Legislations at the UAE Space Agency for over 4 years, before finally becoming Head of AI Governance and Policy at the Prime Minister's Office. Sumaya has a number of professional and academic contributions in the field spanning competition regulations, competitiveness, industry and technology cluster policies, smart specialization policies, microeconomic cluster mapping tool, women in ICT as part of the ITU agenda, women in space as part of the ANUSA agenda, increasing Emirati participation in the workforce, and finally, space policies and strategies. We are honored to have Sumaya here today to discuss her research regarding Emirati female participation and inclusion in the private sector. Welcome, Sumaya.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for the introduction. It's really a great honor to be here today to give this lecture in collaboration with Trend Research, one of the predominant research centers here in the UAE. Great publication, great researchers. Very grateful for this opportunity. And I have just a few slides to share. So I'll be sharing my screen today just to have some sort of a guidance while I walk through the research that I have done in the past. So mainly the topic is quite interesting. It's a topic which I'm so passionate about. It's about women and development. It's about the challenges, the prospects for women empowerment. And it's somehow covering not only the challenges that are faced in the UAE, but also some of few challenges that are also faced on the international community. It's a continuous topic. It's a topic that requires continuous monitoring and maintenance as well, and that's the role of public policies. And mainly, just talking about women empowerment here in the UAE, it's been since day one of the establishment. It's no secret. And this right has been recognized actually by the UAE Constitution, mainly in Article 14 and Article 25, where the right of equality and social justice has been granted to all citizens with different religion and different cultures and social status and nationality. That's also including different race and also whether they were women or men. So this right has been always there, the equality, the principle of equality. And that's by the Constitution, which is the higher power, higher legislation power in the UAE legal system, I would say. So stemming from the UAE constitutions, we can see that the UAE journey in women empowerment has been really there since the 1975, and it was really spearheaded by Her Highness Sheikh Fatma Allah Tawal B'Amarha. And it's really started with the focus on the first phase. So it comes in different phases. And the first phase is mainly on the intellectual and social advancement. So we have a community with women who are really trying to, where the government was trying just to change or shift their minds towards girls' education, encouraging them to be part of the education system, being part of gaining more intellectuality and more of the social advancement as well. And then phase two, which is the 1986 to 1995, we have seen that there was a huge focus on the skills, the capability, building capability for the women to join the workforce and be a part of it. There has been a lot of initiatives as well in different emirates, led by the leadership here in order just to provide some sort of training, coaching, and so on. And then phase three is the golden year, I would call it, the empowerment of women years. And this is where the women actually joined the workforce. We have seen there was like an increased number of women joining the workforce in different emirates, and also the federal government in higher position as well, in leadership position, and including varying from mid-management and so on. And finally, we have reached a stage now, which started since 2006, and where the society is actually empowered by women. So the society has been empowering women during the past decades, and today it's the other way around. So we have women actually empowering the society. And then this was one of the quotes that was actually stated by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed Allah Yahfadh. And we have seen also different statistics that has been provided and measured by the UAE Gender Balance Council, where we can see that there's currently we have reached a stage, I would call it, where we have equal wages and salaries between men and women somehow. And also the cabinet level representatives, the ministers constitute actually 29% of ministers in the cabinet. That's such a great percentage so far. And 70%, that's really impressive, 70% of university graduates are actually women. This percentage is considered really high. I remember back then when I used to study at the UAE University, where we were looking into statistics of women to men, and we were actually exceeding the number of men in engineering, in the Department of Engineering. And this is something that we have noted as well, where 77% of Emirati women are enrolled in higher education, and 56% of these graduates are actually specialized in STEM education. That's science, technology, engineering, and math. That's considered as one of the most important focus that we are currently, as a government, focusing on in terms of the era after the pandemic, where we really have a great focus on digital economy and programming and other technology skills, because we are living in an era of technology. And of course, there are some other impressive percentages, like 50% of the Federal National Council are women. It is somehow, it used to be led by a woman as well. And we have a board member, so for any board in the UAE government, at least there should be one woman or one female board member in every entity. And that's some sort of a quota, I would say. And then we can discuss this further as well after the slides. Now, in terms of the government, the inclusion of women in government, the women participation in the government has been really fascinating here in the UAE. 2/3 of the government employees are actually women. That's a huge percentage. But if you think about as a statistics for women participation in general, for private and public, so for the world average is 41. And I would like just to do a small experiment. I just want to see if the chat function is working. It would be great just to hear from the participants what would be the percentage of women participation in the UAE workforce, that's private and public. So just type in the chat and let's see what do you think about it? If you can just guess the percentage, if the chat function is working, is it? You're in mute, sorry.
I believe the chat option is available on YouTube, not on Zoom.
Yeah, if you can read out the percentages that participants will be typing on the chat, that would be great. I'm just curious to see the mindsets here.
We're checking.
Okay. So the world average is 41%, and it would be great just to see what do you think about the UAE percentage of Emirati women participation in the workforce. Do we have any numbers?
I don't believe anyone has written so far, so we can just proceed.
So we'll just proceed then in this case. So for the UAE, it's a very low share. It's actually 28%, and that was really shocking. And this is only within the scope of 25 to the women age group of 25 to 45 years. And this is as per the World Bank statistics. And this really motivated me just to understand what were the issues and the sub-issues of such a very low percentage of women participation in the workforce within the private sector as well. So in government, we're doing very well. We have great role models of ministers, but in the private sector, this requires more investigation. And looking into the different issues and sub-issues, and those issues are mainly not only for the UAE, but in general. So there's financial dependencies. So women here, I mean, we have a great quality of life, and I mean, in terms of financing, most of the time it's quite easy, I would say. The other one is untapped demand and missed opportunity of economic growth. Of course, there's a lot of untapped demand that's happening here. And the third one, there's as an issue, there's a lack of social inclusion as a consequences of such a low share of Emirati women participation in the workforce. For the financial dependencies, in case of any economic shock, the family will be very vulnerable. If there's only one person who's providing the income in the family, then that's really raising a very high risk in case of any economic shock. So it's really important to have women participating in the workforce as a second income to the family as well. Just to highlight a few of them, the other one, the untapped demand. So the government has spent a tremendous amount of money on women's education. There's like thousands of graduates from the UAE University back, I remember in the old days. And of course, most of them are really specialized in the STEM education. So it's really important to ensure employment of these of the women graduating from the STEM education. The reason is we need to make sure those there's some sort of a return of the investments in education, in women education mainly. And for the lack of social inclusion, so this is a very interesting story to tell. A friend of mine who actually graduated with me from the university, but she decided just to have a different track and be a housewife and dedicated herself to raise her children. And that's something which is very noble. And during the lockdown, she was alone in the house with kids. She was spending so much time with the kids. So 3 months with the kids. And later on, when I started just to meet her the first time after the pandemic, this really impacted the well-being or the mind, I would call it the psychological situation of her. So spending too much time with kids, she started to not able to have a proper conversation. And that's really important to ensure the social inclusion of women. There has been a lot of initiative back then by the government just to have like some sort of clubs and gatherings for women, some sort of unions. And this has been really beneficial in terms of ensuring the social inclusion of those women. Now, aligning all of these issues and sub-issues, so how can we increase the percentage of Emirati women participation, and have used the theory of change methodology in identifying all of the, I would call it a KPIs or targets or what we hope to achieve. And I'm not going to highlight everything in this slide, just a few ones which I would like to highlight because I think those 2 points are quite very important. One of them, whenever there is a domestic accident where a child is a victim of any sort of accident in the house, the first person to be blamed on the media is the mother. And this is something that I have noticed during the years. Sadly, this impacts a lot the social acceptance of women being working or participating in the workforce. It somehow shock or it somehow shake the image of a working mother. And this is against the government's initiatives and direction towards increasing the Emirati women participation and equality. So a message to all the journalists here, and this is what I'm doing right now, it's awareness, is really to focus the press releases of such incident by proposing other solutions. Other solutions could be, for example, what the government should do in order to provide a health environment for children who has mothers working and participating in the workforce, who are really dedicating themselves in the development of the UAE socio-economy. One could be, and this is something that I have seen as a practice even before the pandemic, is to provide alternative childcare solutions. And this is what journalists has to highlight as part of the awareness. So some government entities has provided on-site daycare. In my office, I have a daycare just across the other side of the office, of the windows. And it's quite fascinating because I have seen a lot of women working over there, dropping their kids and then going back to office. That's the perfect solution, I would call it. But again, we might even need more daycare that are infused with the Emirati culture. We have seen a lot of children nowadays who are Emirati were having difficulties in speaking an Arabic language. They're mainly considered English as their mother tongue language. So probably as well part of the Emirati culture as well. So this is an issue that might be even tackled by having or subsidizing more daycare infused with the Emirati culture as well. And then we have the other option. Probably we need to do some qualified and trained nanny, provide some qualified and trained nanny. And this started to happen recently. I would like to hire a nanny who's able to do a first aid in case of emergency. That's the minimum I would hope for. And that's only in case if the daycare is not possible. The other topic I would like to highlight here from this slide is the flexible working conditions. And that's a very funny story. I have written this paper like in 2019, but not right now, when agile government was an option. Today, with the pandemic, agile government is a necessity. So talking about flexible working hours, talking about remote offices, it's kind of part of the processes right now. And this is something that we are looking for. Daycare allowance, yes, that's supposed to be in the red box actually. And I truly enjoyed having a daycare allowance when I used to work at the Telecommunication Regulatory Authority. I can't imagine how I was able to progress in my career without having my kids in a daycare, for example. It's really provided me a lot of peace of mind, and I was able to focus on the daily work and tasks while I'm in the office, because I know for sure that my kids are safe. They are in safe hands, dedicated teachers, and having a great day with the learning experience as well. So that's one thing that I would really push for, and many other entities in the private sector as well, to think about the daycare allowance. I would also consider a daycare allowance more important than an educational allowance that is starting from grade 1 or probably KG2. And now, for the next slide is mainly how can we implement all of these? It's not possible to have everything at the same time, right? And this is the art of strategy and policy. You really need to have some sort of roadmap on how to incrementally implement some of these initiatives. And before doing that, we need to understand what do we have. And there are different types of women. So there are women who are not interested at all in working. And those women who are, we really need to focus on changing their mindset. There are women who are contemplating and they are interested, but they didn't start yet. They're having in mind that, yes, we would like to, it would be great to join the workforce, but probably not now. We haven't got any serious step towards that. And then the other type, they are really serious about joining the workforce. They have taken really serious steps toward that, preparing CV, applying, and that's within the 4 months. And there are women who are really started working. They are in action, they are in office. They've been in the office just recently from 3 to 6 months. How can we maintain them in the workforce? And then the other category of women who are already in the workforce. So how can we just further develop their skills and their leadership skills and so on. So looking into these different types, there are a number of initiatives that we can just implement within 3 phases, mainly. The first phase is, so awareness. Awareness is something which is continuously seen in different phases, in all the phases. And it's not only for the women to encourage them to be part of the workforce or to maintain their position in the workforce, but also for families to support them. Now, one interesting finding in one of the research, Emirati women are so influenced by their families. They usually take decision consultation with their families. So it's really important to include them in the awareness activities as well. And of course, awareness for journalists to react positively whenever there is an incident or a case of an accident involving children of Emirati working women. So we need to think about solution instead of criticizing and going beyond or going against the government directions. The other thing is mainly the training and support, especially for those women who've been out of the workforce for a while. That's including not only training like courses, but also career coaching, which is something that can be implemented within a working Emirati groups across all phases. So the first phase is create the will and the capability to join the workforce. This is how I would summarize it. And then phase two, once we have enough players in the market, enough women joining the workforce, in this case, we can just think about the infrastructure. So taking the infrastructure, or that's daycare in a better quality and a higher quality. So we think about subsidizing daycare with Emirati infusion culture, the on-site daycare, and a very good example, another one is by DIWA, the training of nanny, having qualified domestic workers as well, and of course the nursery allowance. And this way we will be able to just create all of these incentives to support and maintain having women in the workforce, and making sure that the children as well, the children of the Emirati women joining the workforce, are able to embrace the UAE culture and language. And for phase three, so back then when I worked on it, so remote working and flexible hours has not been part of our routine daily life. But now looking into the current situation and looking into these solution phases, I would just simply put remote offices and flexible hours in phase one. And I would see it really solidly implemented in a very solid way within the next 1 or 2 years. So that's somehow summarizing the process of change towards the increased women participation in the workforce. And that's not mainly on the government sector, but also on the private sector. And this is what leadership from the private sector should consider. And just opening the discussion for questions. Hope this was somehow beneficial and useful, and somehow adding some sort of insight for leadership in the private sector on how to embrace policies and decision on increasing the women participation in the workforce. This is actually an extraction of a study that I published with the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Governance, and it's related to towards increasing the Emirati women participation in the workforce. I have added the link over here, and I also added a small profile about myself, and you can feel free just to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. You can just write any inquiry or probably any criticism. I would love to hear as well any room for improvement. And yeah, and let's open the floor for discussions.
Thank you so much, Sumaya, for these really fruitful insights and really illuminating statistics. What really struck me was the stark dichotomy or stark contrast between the labor force participation rate of Emirati women here versus worldwide, which I believe was 28% compared to something in the 40%. Yet from your statistics as well, like over 70% of Emirati women are educated and have pursued secondary education. And so I think given your talk, it seems to me the issue is in retention rate again. And I love the propositions you've proposed today here about daycare, and really acknowledging that working moms are kind of villainized in the media as such. And so really working with both language and the press, as well as acknowledging a certain level of privilege that allows working women to accommodate both lives in the work field and at home. I think the daycare idea is really amazing and should be adopted more often. But going back to your own background and your own personal wealth of experiences, I would love to talk a little bit more about what made you decide to enter the telecommunications industry, and have you always known you've had a passion for technology? Because for you to reach such a high position and be so well accomplished, I think you have to have a passion for it, and I'd love to hear a bit more from you.
Yeah, definitely. So usually the passion or the choice of joining a technical track has been actually very common back then. We've seen, I remember when I was in high school, talking about joining a college of engineering on IT has been very, very common. And the reason of that is the government efforts in making sure that awareness sessions are done properly through the teachers in schools back then. It was a very wise decision. And I actually joined the telecommunication engineering with a great focus on satellite communication because of my passion in space back then. So I would call those are the drivers, and slowly being part of that journey. I remember I was a very technical person attending United Nations related meeting as well, lawyers and engineers. Like engineers who are actually at the same time are lawyers, having both degree, and this inspired me to do a master in international law at Paris Sorbonne University. I was able to understand my limitation as an engineer. I was able to communicate with the lawyers and communicate some complex technical description. So I would call it like being able to communicate science for non-technical people. So that's a passion. And then knowing a little of everything, that what actually defines a public policy person. So I decided just to study public policy as a second master. So it's not about the number of certification, but mainly about the knowledge that is gained during the journey. And then that was my passion.
Thank you so much for that. And you said something in your talk, which was Emirati women are so influenced by their families. As an Emirati woman yourself, what role did your family play in supporting or perhaps facing some sort of challenge, posing some sort of challenge to you pursuing both of your degrees?
There has been a full support, actually. I'm the only daughter between 4 brothers. So as hard as it might be, as it might sound, but actually I was somehow blending with the boys, and just taking a technical degree has been really very accepted and supported by the family. I'm supported by my both parents and brothers as well in achieving what I achieve every day.
That is really amazing to hear, and honestly very inspirational. But maybe you can talk to us about the biggest obstacles you've faced in your professional career, not necessarily at home.
So biggest obstacle is mainly being an engineer working between lawyers. That was one of the obstacles that I have faced. And every time I remember there was a failure, I just simply pursue a degree or a training course or read a book. So usually failure motivates me. And I believe this is the case with all women. That's why women in leadership position, they really strive and earn that leadership position. And then this is how we became resilient.
That's very true, actually. And I think women are just innately more adept at handling more pressures from different sources. And as a lady in STEM, I'm sure you've often been labeled as such. Did you ever feel like your work was separated from competent labor and categorized as a separate entity of like female labor in order to fill a quota?
Well, if there is something worth to highlight from that question, that would be just taking this opportunity to address the issue of blue washing women empowerment. This has been seen in different organizations where they might just create a committee for supporting and empowering women, where women's voice is heard, but in fact, it's just a blue washing to tick the box that the organization has already done their job in creating or empowering women, so they don't usually take it seriously. And blue washing is a big problem because you don't really tackle the great potential, you don't unlock the great potential of having women, especially women leadership in the organization. I believe also women makes the best public policy experts. And the reason is women have a very collaborative approach and leadership style. And this is how you make the best strategic conversation. And strategic conversation is considered as the fundamental of making a policy.
Correct, yes. Thank you for that. But to go back to something you touched upon in your talk, which was the gender quotas again, oftentimes we hear of gender quotas being created around the world, and they're created with good intention. They want to combat gender imbalances and attain equal representations, like you were just saying. But from your personal experiences, do you find these quotas beneficial or counterproductive? And what are the circumstances that determine the success of these quotas?
That's a very interesting question. Well, quotas can be a great tool to enforce some of the policies related to women inclusion. But again, I was just talking about blue washing. Yes. Just to tick the box and comply to that quota, you might just hire a woman who is, I would call it maybe a relative or someone who we would know through someone else, just to tick the box, and then making sure and maintaining, having this woman on the board, that her voice is heard during the discussions. And the quota is mainly a minimum, that's a minimum quota. So you can even have more women on the board. So instead of having only one just to tick the box, just would be great just to have more. So it's a good tool. If you think of it, it's just enforcing the women empowerment agenda. But at the same time, we need to create more awareness, especially to the leadership, that this is a minimum quota, you can have more, and there are great potential that you can unlock by having a woman on the board and having more diverse board. So it's not about even being able to network with other government entities by having board members, but also being able to embrace the skill of a strategic conversation that women usually are mastering, especially in public policy.
Thank you for that, but correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm understanding is you're saying quotas are a great way to enter women to the labor force, but they need to be complemented with other metrics and KPIs to ensure that the performance is up to standard, and to ensure that the access is to basically bridge the gap between education and the return on investment on education, essentially making sure that the competent women are allocated the right positions.
Absolutely, and I believe it's a good start.
Amazing, thank you so much.
But it's only a good start, and there are more to do afterwards. Yeah.
Brilliant. And something else that I wanted to touch upon with you, Her Excellency Sara Al-Amiri, on the International Day of Women and Girls in Science earlier this year, she commented on how the Emirati female experience is unique and non-representative of the plights faced by women elsewhere in the world. I'm curious to know, from your wide array of personal experiences and wealth of knowledge, how feminism and empowerment manifest differently here in the UAE.
Sure, thank you. I mean, that question is great. And Her Excellency Sara Al-Amiri is the greatest supporter in the agenda of women empowerment, especially in women in space. And talking about the unique situation of women in the UAE, that it's unique in terms of that it has been there since the very early establishment of the country. It's been since day one. There has been different initiatives and forces to do that. Now, what's so unique, actually, women empowerment or the respect of women has been stemmed from our own values and traditions and culture. While on the international level, there has been a driving force to adopt or to embrace women empowerment. And those driving forces are related to incidents that happened in the past. While here in the UAE, it's been there as part of our values and tradition and ethics as well. So that I would describe it in this way.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. I fully agree with you. And I think it is a very special and very particular way. We're in a very special position to witness so much that is happening, so much growth and advancements, but also we're very privileged that it is embedded, the ideals of feminism are embedded already within the fabric of our culture and society. So that's amazing. Something I want to talk about again, about from your personal background is, was representation important to you growing up? There has been a push towards female representation in the media and elsewhere, but I'm just curious, did you have a role model growing up that you looked up to, and was it ever important for you to be a representative, a female representative, for others to look upon you at any point in your career?
Sure, definitely. There has been a lot of women who are actually inspiring me. So it's not only one person, to be honest, but I can remember in the early stages, one is the Chief Operation Officer of SpaceX, and that's Gwen, who's actually handling the whole, or I would say she's actually implementing the vision of the leader of SpaceX, Elon Musk. But again, from the UAE, I remember back then when the first female minister was appointed, Her Excellency Reem Al Hashmi. That was really very impactful. It was, we've been, not only me, but a lot of girls and women has been looking at her as a great role model for having women in the government. And that might also explain the reason why 2/3 of government employees in the UAE are actually women. It's because of the great role model that we have in the cabinet. So that would be a great reason. And we might even need to have more role models in the private sectors to increase also the women participation over there and to have them as great inspiring figures.
Amazing. Yes, thank you. And now that at your level of competency and success, you're undoubtedly an inspiration to many. How do you handle the responsibilities that come with that privilege? And is there anything you do in particular to be mindful of that?
Well, thank you, first of all, for considering me as a role model. I mean,
I'm sure many of our listeners would agree.
Sure. Well, the thing is, being a role model is a great responsibility because you really need to behave perfectly. You need to support whenever it's needed. You need to prioritize your time in order to support those who might need you and see you as a role model. You need to be so perfect and a perfectionist in all of your behavior, your achievements. Just in order to make sure that all what you do is really having a positive impact to others. And that's the responsibility I would see. I've been handling a lot of chapters before, women in ICT. I've been handling as well women in space. And I've been really approached by different young girls, even from the international community, just asking, maybe just raising inquiries about women in the UAE. So it has been like really sort of a representation, which really added a huge responsibility on my shoulder. And I was really happy just to do so.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I can imagine it is a lot, but again, it is a privilege. And finally, I think this is my last question for today, which is, there's so much to be learned and gleaned from your experiences here, but what parting advice would you give to young professionals starting out in their career, both young men and young women listening today?
Sure. So for all the women and men who are just started their professional career, never reject a task, just do everything. And that's a great opportunity for you to learn everything. I remember back then when I used to be a fresh graduate, I've been doing all sorts of tasks, from event management to letters writing, to just booking meeting rooms. And I was just an engineer. I was doing radio planning. So I was just questioning myself, why am I doing all of these sort of tasks? But then I realized those are really important, because whenever you reach a leadership position, you'll be able to understand the workload and the task that you're given to your team. And the team is not necessarily some team that will be specialized in one thing, but they will be diverse in so many things. You need someone who will be drafting the press releases. You'll be needing someone who will be doing the event management. So it's quite important that you are fully aware of all of these tasks in order to reach that position and be able just to be a great leader and manage things properly and efficiently. But at the same time, one advice also for the women, women are so resilient, and never underestimate yourself. we fall, we get up, and we be even more motivated to move with that journey. So this is something that I just want to highlight to all the women out there.
Yes. Yes, thank you for that. I think that these are worthwhile pieces of advice that should be taken into account. And just to close it off, I would like to ask you again the calls for action. There were two that really struck me from your talk today, which was one regarding the press and highlighting that language is powerful and could not should be leveraged for positive social change within the press. And you mentioned an example of domestic accidents usually falling on the mother's plate. And the other thing you've mentioned was daycare and really highlighting how accounting for the lack of privilege and making the decision between starting your career and raising a family easier for women to remain in the workforce. Are there any other calls to action you would like to end off with?
It's mainly acceptance, and achieving the social acceptance, and the daycare, and as well as providing other alternatives, any kind of alternatives for women to join the workforce. And that's even including being able for organizations, especially in the private sector, to provide more flexible hours, more days to work remotely. There might be an issue with connectivity, and this has been really seen in rural area, but including women in the rural area through remote work. That would be even a great example on how to increase the women participation in the workforce. We have the Etihad railway trains coming very soon. It might really help with the connectivity, but until then, remote work might be a very good fast track solution that can be embraced by the private sector.
Amazing. Thank you for that. We look forward to a brighter future for us all. And thank you, Sumaya, for joining us. I would like to extend a warm thank you to our guest, Sumaya Al-Hajri, for her worthwhile contributions today. It has been a delight delving into the shared experiences of womanhood in this day and age with such an esteemed guest, and to be able to envision a better tomorrow for all with actionable steps. Hopefully, we can walk away from this talk with the recognition that the struggles faced by women are struggles faced by society at large. And I hope this e-lecture was a productive agent for empowerment for all. I would like to also express my sincerest gratitude to our audience for tuning in and taking part of this e-lecture today. We at Trends hope to host you again at one of the many symposia and ongoing series of online and open public events. Once again, thank you all very much for joining, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much for hosting me. Thank you.
Thank you.